Good afternoon, everyone. It works much better when the microphone is turned on, doesn't it? It's just one of those days when you're working from home. Welcome to Whiskey Wednesday, the webcast from WhiskyCast Live. I'm Mark Gillespie in the WhiskyCast studio in Haddonfield, New Jersey. Hope you had a good holiday weekend, at least here in the States, or a bank holiday weekend in some parts of Europe or wherever you are, and that your week has been going well so far. We have been blessed with good weather, but just not quite comfortable enough to be outside. It's surface of the sun, hot and humid outside here in New Jersey. So I'm sitting in relatively comfortable air conditioning right now. We have a great lineup of guests, a great panel for today. And if you want to submit your comments, you can always do that at the chat rooms on Facebook, Periscope, and on our YouTube channel if you're watching on those platforms. If you're watching on Twitter, relax. Don't respond to the tweet that has this video feed in it, because we won't see your comments until after the webcast ends. We won't be able to address them in the show. But we would love to have your questions and your comments, and they're already starting to come in. Let me bring in our panel right now. We have George Grant from Glenfarclas, and Brendan McCarron, who's the head of maturing whiskey stocks for Ardbeg and Glenmorangie. Gentlemen, how are you doing today?
Not bad, thanks, Mark. Yourself?
It's I can think of a lot worse things that I could be doing right now, including working. So, Brendan, are you're in Edinburgh area right now, or are you on Islay? Where are you?
So I can see, I can't hear. So 1 second.
Okay. We're going to give him a chance to fix his headphones. George, I know you're up at the distillery in Speyside. How are things up there right now? I know last week you were supposed to join us, but the weather kind of got in the way.
Yeah, just obviously being up here, we don't really have connection to the proper internet connection, I suppose. Everything's done through 4G. We're good. The distillery's running. We're making whiskey, which is the most important thing. As I did say to you last week, we had lots of rain, which was obviously good. We used that. We have made the decision to shut the visitor centre, so we will not be receiving any visitors for the rest of the year. That was a decision we made fairly early on, but it seemed obviously the most important thing was to keep all our staff safe and make them feel happy about coming to work.
Can you hear us now, Brendan? Brendan, can you hear us? This all worked brilliantly before we started, I promise. Live broadcasting, it's a wonder. Brendan, are you hearing us okay?
Nope.
Okay, Brendan, wave if you can hear us. Okay. Well, we'll see if we can figure out what's going on with Brendan's audio. George, while we're waiting, tell me what about this 63-year-old Pagoda edition that you released just a couple of weeks ago. This is the oldest one you've ever bottled, right?
Yes. So I was explaining to you a little bit off air. It actually came as a little bit of a shock to me. The whiskey itself, we actually bottled up 4 years ago. But it's taken a little bit of time to complete the project, to get the glass right, to get the packaging right. So this is the fifth and final one in the Pagoda series.
And
this is called the Sapphire.
The Sapphire, and you've got it right back there too, right?
I do have it right here. So this is there you go. So it's from 1953, which is the oldest whiskey we do have in the warehouses. It says this is the Sapphire edition. The last one that came out last year, I think it was the Ruby edition, and then there was the three prior to that as well. So,
where is this available?
So, this entire project was initially sold to my Chinese distributor, and then the project was sold to a company called Whisky Corp. But they have they put it onto a website. It's available in a couple of retailers in the UK, but I think it's mainly sort of been put online just to let people see it. Initially, it has been like an Asian release, China, Singapore, and so on.
Brendan, are you able to hear me yet? I know you can hear George, but you can't hear me, correct?
Brendan, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I don't know if you can hear me.
We can now
I
hear
can hear you, but you
But I
can
can't
you hear
hear Mark.
Mark?
No, it's glorious. It's a wonderful situation. I can't hear Mark. Mark, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But I can hear you perfectly clear, George. But I can't hear Mark.
Okay,
The gremlins.
be fun.
The gremlins.
I
tell you what I'll do. So, George, unless you want me to interview you, tell me more about your Chinese market. What I'm going to do is I'll disconnect and I'll come back in and see if that.
Yeah, let's have you
probably just
your browser.
probably just fixes the gremlins. So I'll leave and I'll be
never
back
had this
in.
problem
I'll be
happen.
back in 2 seconds.
Okay. We have never had this problem before where one guest could hear me and the other one can't. So,
well, Mark, you can always ask me the questions, and I can reword them and ask them something completely different.
well, we've got a question here from. Let's bring some comments in right now, and mostly it's tell us what. Hockey season nearly ready to start in our current Twilight Zone. Thank you, Tyrone, in Nova Scotia for that. Greg in France, hello from France.
I prefer the previous comment because he wrote hickey season. I don't know what hickey means in America, but it means something completely different here.
Okay, Brendan, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Verizon gets a free plug. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you just fine. And Graham Fraser says, welcome, Brendan. As you'll see, it's raining outside in Stirling tonight. It's probably raining in a lot of places.
Well, Graham is in the same town as me, so good to see you, Graham. And yes, it is raining in Stirling tonight. We've been pretty good with the weather, I must say, recently, but it's looking pretty poor tonight.
And Graham Fraser points out there's now non-quarantine access to Scotland from the Netherlands announced today. That's good news, I think. Although I'm beginning to think that it probably would be just a better thing if everybody stayed home for a little while longer.
Yeah. It's a bit hard to tell what's going on, isn't it?
Brendan, we were talking while you were sorting out the audio about George shutting down the visitor center at Glenfarclas. Any word on when Ardbeg and Glenmorangie might reopen? I know that that's probably above your pay grade to make that call, but have you heard anything within the company?
It's a little way off. You know, I'm sure George said the same thing. So our priority number one was the safety of everyone who works in our companies. And so we took the decision to close down not just the visitor centres, but production. And we shut everything down and then worked out how can we do this safely. And then slowly we've started to build up things. So the most important thing, even for the people who want to come and see us at the distillery, the most important thing is that we're laying down some amazing spirit to be whiskey in the future. Our visitor centres are closed. They will reopen eventually, but not right now. Not right now. And there's several phases of reopening in the country. And we'll follow those. So we will open our visitor centres as soon as we can, as George will, I'm sure. But just not right now. It's just not right now. It just takes a little bit of time, a bit of planning. And it's the importance of people first. Whiskey's really important. Yep. Whiskey's amazing. But, you know, the safety of people comes first, always.
Absolutely. As you well know, George, I know you told us a month or so ago when this decision was announced that you guys actually lost one of your colleagues to the virus.
Yeah, the bottling hall down in Edinburgh, yeah.
Now,
as Brendan was saying, the people are by far and away the most important thing. And it is a catch-22 situation as well, because obviously you want to support local businesses, local hotels to bring people to the area, but then the local people also don't want you to bring people to the area because of safety issues. So
it's tough.
I guess wait and see.
Yeah, it's tough. There's no right decision, is there, George? There's just you need to trust your gut for a bit, and we will. I'm confident we will have people at Glenfarclas, at Ardbeg and Glenmorangie soon. But there's not an exact date on it just yet.
Our date's next year.
Yeah, spring probably next March, April, something like that. Chris Ratcliffe has a good question, George, about that Pagoda edition, the final one. If it's your oldest whiskey, why now? could it have aged longer? And you told me off camera before we started, this was actually bottled several years ago. And I'm assuming you still have some 1953 casks you haven't bottled yet, right?
Correct. I've still got a few 1953 casks. One of them I have already, earmarked to be bottled as a 70-year-old in a few years' time.
A 70-year-old, you don't say.
So that hopefully 2023 will be the 70-year-old. So.
Is that to mark your 70th birthday, George? Or
well, I'm thinking about by then 70 months since I've had a haircut. So.
Well, that's a little bit of news that we're actually going to be able to break. So 3 more years and we can have a 70-year-old Glenfarclas, because as far as I know, we've only had 70-year-olds from Gordon and MacPhail folks, the Mortlock and the Glenlivet, and then the 75-year-old. And well, we did have a Macallan 72-year-old. Those 3 distilleries are the only ones with 70s, and then you guys would be the 4th unless somebody comes out with something before that period.
I mean, obviously, we can't do it before then because we also have to wait for the whiskey to get older.
Of course. Now, let's, and as Greg points out, some people thought the pandemic was over and didn't listen to distanciation measures to follow and partied like crazy some weeks ago to start with. A lot of pressure from companies and, and people not wearing masks. Wear the masks, people. It's important. Ben Marnik points out he's doing a Glengoyne tasting tomorrow, paid £42, and his drams haven't arrived yet. So he is not a happy camper on that. How are you guys doing with virtual tastings and with the current environment in terms of not being able to travel? Because, George, I got to figure 3 months or so is probably the longest period you've usually spent around the house, right?
Yeah, probably for 25 years, I think. But yeah, the online tastings have been quite interesting. Initially did start doing quite a few in the US. Obviously with the time zones, a few of them didn't start until midnight. I've now started doing them in Australia, which and they start at 9 o'clock in the morning, which does of course make for a very interesting day. It's been fun. I mean, like things like this one are far more interesting and far more fun for me. Some of the ones I've done where you're basically just speaking to a blank screen, I've not really enjoyed as much. You can see people are watching you, but you don't see them or hear them. So I mean, it's a thing getting used to. Of course, my only worry is the fact what's going to happen after this is when everyone says, "Well, you managed to do this fine during lockdown. Why do you need to travel to these places anymore? You can just do it online."
And Pete Head points out the non-listening, obeying the rules is the greatest risk indeed. Can't believe people need to party this much after just a minor lockdown. It could be a lot worse. And as George pointed out, there was a typo in Tyrone's earlier quote. And Tyrone points out, please tell George he does not want to give a hickey to the association. Also known as art. Brandon, how has it been for you? Because last time we were all together as we were getting ready to do this, we all pointed out, was right before all hell broke loose. We were all down in New Zealand having fun and just watching the news and going, please don't let us get stuck down here.
Yeah, that's true. So, I mean, it's only a small part of my job, but it's a great part of my job, and it's probably a part that gets quite a lot of attention, is to travel all around the world and talk about the whiskey that we make. And it tends to be in a place where there's other people who make great whiskey talking about the whiskey they make. So, first of all, I get a big kick out of talking about our new Glenmorangies and Ardbegs, but I also get a big kick out of being around other people. George and I know each other from this kind of circuit first and foremost, and we've met in a few pubs from time to time drinking beer, but let's not go into that. It's a great. Oh, we definitely will. Don't worry. But it's a great buzz, and it's a great thing to do. So it's something that I miss, but the other thing I'd say is it's been really successful. It's been really great just going online and meeting people and being able to talk to them about something that you're passionate about and something that people are really into. I'll be the same as George. It's not the same. So the last time the three of us were in New Zealand, you learn as much behind the scenes as you do out in the middle of a masterclass, and you get a different feeling. And if people are tasting whiskey and they talk about something they're tasting right there, you can probably catch a moment and sort of bring it to life. Whereas sometimes you do a great tasting, but you're kind of talking to a screen, and everyone has to go on mute, and everyone has to wait to the end, and all the questions come at the end. So you don't get that kind of in the moment where someone puts their nose in a glass of Ardbeg or a sherry bomb for the first time and goes, "Oh wow, I've just got this thing," and you can play off it. So I'd say quarantine tastings are going great, and I can see a future for them. I can see a future for doing Zoom tastings for certain things, but I don't think it'll ever replace that feeling or that connection you get when you're in a room with people either trying whiskey for the first time or trying a brand new whiskey and they've been drinking whiskey for their entire life, you know?
Well, we didn't get a chance to, since we were sorting out all the technical stuff at the start. So what's in your glasses, gentlemen? What did you pour yourselves tonight besides that water that Brendan's drinking?
Yeah. So I've gone for an Ardbeg Travan. So this is the 19-year-old Ardbeg. First release. This is the first batch of this new permanently available Ardbeg. So nice 19-year-old. I've picked it for two reasons. I love Ardbeg, and also George likes to have a little dig at me, saying every so often, at least our whiskies have age statements on them. And he told me that in New Zealand. So I didn't give him the chance this time. I preempted him with a huge 19 on the label. Also,
Fantastic.
it's an amazing whiskey. It's an amazing
He's
whiskey.
got you beat with that 63-year-old.
Well, obviously, I didn't open that one, but I went for something a little bit younger, so I just went for a 40-year-old Glenfarclas. So
No,
sorry about that one.
it's a typical Wednesday night dram, isn't it, George?
It pretty much is. You know, it's you sort of you're winding up towards the weekend, so you just got get yourself in the mood.
When you work from home during the lockdown, every night is a Friday night in theory.
Do you know? Could I ask that question? Have you found that? Have you found people saying this? So I'm noticing it more and more. So either friends who are whiskey drinkers or friends who I have who are not as into whiskey, and I give them a bottle of whiskey saying, "Look, this is 18-year-old or Signet or something. It's really nice whiskey," and they'll save it for a special occasion. And I'm not saying this is a good situation. This is a really tough situation, but I'm finding people are going, do you know what? Rather than wait for a christening, a wedding, some special occasion, they're saying, do you know what? To hell with it. Let's open this 18-year-old whiskey, or let's get into the Signet. I'm the same. I had this 19. I was always going to drink it. But when isolation started, it was one of the first nights where I went, do you know what? There's no time like the present. I don't know if you guys are the same.
Yeah. George?
Brendan, I must admit, I'm a little bit worried about that though. I mean, lockdown started 105 days ago, and you're still drinking that bottle.
I need to up my game. I know.
But it's what you said. I mean, I find it's like being double-edged. I mean, I think initially when lockdown started, there was an awful lot. You certainly felt as though there was an awful lot more sort of people drinking at home. But what we've definitely seen regarding sales, which has been quite interesting, in the UK we've seen much higher end whiskey sales go up, but in Asia we've seen much more 10-year-old, 12-year-old sales go up, which has been fantastic. And then bizarrely in the US, all our sales have gone up, which has been amazing. So.
Yeah, because I don't know, George, in the US, how much of your stuff is on premise and in bars and restaurants, as opposed to off premise?
That's obviously the huge difference. I mean, most of ours is through off sales. We do very little through the bars and restaurants, so we've really not been affected as much as the bigger companies have been in that respect. But I think also what we've sort of seen in the States is where people, if they were drinking the Glenmorangie, Glenfiddich, Glenlivet in a bar, and then they are then going online to buy a bottle, they're like, well, I drink this one already. When I go out, I might try something a bit different, or I might try something else, whereas before we're going to bars, they might not have had a chance to. So in that respect, it has benefited us a little bit.
Just for the record, my glass, I have Wild Turkey rare breed rye that was just announced today. Full disclosure, they sent me this a few days ago, along with the sample of the Master's Keep 17-year-old bottled in Bond bourbon, and they announced it today, so I went ahead and opened it today. So sláinte, guys, and good health to everybody watching tonight.
Sláinte. Cheers.
Matt Crumpler, in weird honor of our guests tonight, he blended an ounce of Glenfarclas 17 with a quarter ounce of Ardbeg 10. It's quite nice. Cheers.
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised at all. If you've got great ingredients then guess what? It's usually, well, you're starting off well if you have great ingredients, so not surprised at all.
And I'd love to hear your tasting notes for that one, Matt, if you want to share them with us. You were talking about those, about your plan for that 70-year-old. David Owen said, "Evening, Mark, guests, and everyone. Just a thought, which distillery is most likely to release the first 100-year-old single malts?" And he lists Macallan, Glengrant, Glenlivet, Glenfarclas. Who might release one? Obviously, if the 53 is the oldest cask you guys have, George, it's going to be a long time before you guys get to 100. But
yeah, I mean, I think it would be very, very difficult for us to do it specifically. I mean, this 53 that's sitting beside me, I mean, it is bottled at Cask-Strength at 45.7. So this particular cask would never have made it to being 100 years old. You know, you're obviously losing strength every year, and then you always do find once you get to that sort of level of strength, it does sort of speed up in the losses. The one that I'm going to be bottling as a 70-year-old, it's still up above 50%, but I still think to be able to age it for another 30 plus years would be a struggle.
yeah, does the I want to make sure we understood you. Does the evaporation go off quicker as it gets older and go from that 45% down?
Yes. So I mean, normally in the initial aging process for us anyway, we would lose 1.5–2% volume, but then we'd also lose about 0.3–0.4% alcohol every year as well. You do sort of feel once it gets to like 25 years old, there is a sort of period where it stops losing. But then once it does get to like I said, like 45, you will almost see, we have to check it like almost every year. And sometimes we'll see it drop, 0.5% to 1% alcohol.
And Chris Ratcliffe asks, has Jack Daniel's done a 100-year-old bottling? Nope, they've done 100th anniversary, I'm sure, but not nobody's ever done anything older than 75 years that Gordon and MacPhail did with the Mortlocks several years ago.
The biggest answer to that question would be, who's going to mature in the tightest? So it would have to be an American oak ex-sherry barrel to get there. But even then, it would be a miracle to get to 100 years old. And even if you did, I mean, George, surely you'll back me here. Would it taste that good? Would there be any point other than just to say it's 100 years old?
Well, that's very true. I mean, but you could also say that for some other people that have done older whiskey. You always debate the fact, should you not have drunk that earlier?
Chris, inside the cask points out, we're probably fortunate to get a hold of more time than usual from master blenders and distillers, as they can't be at the distillery as per usual. George, I know you're at the distillery pretty much every day. You split your time between the distilleries when you can get there, but how much time do you guys get to spend actually overseeing stuff?
Yeah, so that's the difference in my role. So most of my career, I've been a distillery manager. So I've been making new make spirits. So I used to be the manager of Oban or Lagavulin or Kalila. So I would be on site every single day. But these days I'm not a distiller anymore. I'm a whiskey maker, as we call it at Glenmorangie and Ardbeg. So most of my time is spent in the blending laboratory, which is situated in Edinburgh. So I'll be on site at Glenmorangie usually twice a month. So, 100 times a year. And I'd be at Ardbeg maybe once a month. So 12 times a year. But most of my time is the samples will arrive at the sensory lab and I'll look at them. Now, here's a real perk of the pandemic. It's about one of the only perks. This is what working from home looks like when you're a whiskey maker. So these things arrive in my house and my wife will walk in and I've got these lined up right across the dining table and I've got glasses of whiskey poured at 9 a.m. And she's like, "What are you doing?" And I look at her and I say, "Well, I'm working. I'm really busy. Can you mind? Can you out?" So even before the situation we're in right now, we have distillery managers at Ardbeg and Glenmorangie who are fantastic. I'm looking at the new make spirit to nose it, make sure it's okay, and I'm looking at the mature samples to come in. We'll help pick what has to be blended together, and then we'll check it once it's together. So I'm on site a fair bit, but not that much.
HC says Brendan should have pulled out the wee beastie. It does have an age statement.
So it does have an age statement, and the one that I just held up here. So this is the wee beastie, but the wee beastie was bottled a couple of days before we had to go into lockdown. So it's not in Britain right now. So it's in America, it's in Germany, it's in all these places. I have my bottle, but I don't have a finished bottle, if you like. But you're right, it's a great whiskey.
Tor Christensen, who works at a distillery up in Norway, says, send one cask to us in the Arctic. Our angel share is really low. Of course, once you send it outside of Scotland, you can't call it Scotch whiskey.
Exactly, yeah.
David and Carolyn Taylor from Australia in Tasmania say, would you ever do cask strength at 55% plus? Well, George, you guys do with the 105. And I know Ardbeg has done some cask strengths too, right?
Oh, yeah. We do a non-Cask-Strength at 57.1, Corey Vrecken, you know. I think it's a good point. Like, Cask-Strength is Cask-Strength. Cask-Strength is Cask-Strength. I think sometimes people think if it's above 50, it means it's Cask-Strength. It's not. It's literally the strength it is as it comes out the cask is Cask-Strength. Yep. Now, if it's 3 years old, more often than not, you know, 99.99% of the time, it's going to be very high in alcohol.
Yep.
Going to go all the way down.
Brendan, did we freeze you?
Or so on and so forth.
It's a good look, though. I like it.
Brendan, you froze there with your arm in the fully upright and locked position for a second there. So if you want to finish what you were saying.
Is your
tell me he can't.
Again? Brendan, can you hear us?
Oh, did it just freeze there?
You froze for a second. Are you back? Can you hear us both?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. Chris Ratcliffe asks, George, what do you think of the growth of independent distilleries, but also the growth of the Goliath Distillery owner group? I assume, I'm not sure what he means by Goliaths, but I can think of a couple offhand. But what do you guys think of the growth of the little smaller distilleries that are popping up all over Scotland now?
I think it's fantastic. You know, you've got little distilleries like Ardbeg that have, started making more whiskey. It's very, good. But I know, but I've been asked this question a lot recently. When I first joined the industry, there was 97 distilleries producing whiskey in Scotland. We're now up to over 150 distilleries. But then you do have, as you said, places in Norway, Belgium, New Zealand, all over the world making whiskey. And no, I think it's a fantastic thing. I mean, Mark, you'll remember this very well, I'm sure. 20 years ago, you'd walk into a liquor store in the States and there'd be 3 aisles of vodka. There'd be flavored vodka, flavored this, flavored that. You walk into a liquor store now, there's maybe half an aisle of vodka, but there's maybe 2 or 2.5 aisles of brown spirits. And as we always said before, people that drink whiskey don't just drink one type of whiskey. People that drink Glenfarclas will drink Glenmorangie, they'll drink Ardbeg, they'll drink bourbon. People drink brown spirits, but people that drink vodka don't really sort of move away from white spirits. So I think it's a great thing.
And Brendan, let me ask you about this because your distillery ownership within LVMH bought into Woodinville in Washington a couple of years ago. Have you had a chance to play with any of their stuff?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say play with their stuff, but I actually got a very cool gig. So I got sent over to Woodinville before we bought it to, kind of kick the tires, so run my nose over their spirit. And I was just blown away by how good they were. It's a bit of a British reference, but George will get this. I felt like the man from Del Monte, where I was sent over there just to see if I said yes or no. And I said yes, because it is genuinely, hand on heart, I said this when I was there long before we owned it. This is one of the best bourbons I've ever had. And I am a bourbon freak. I love brown spirits. So now I sit on the board of Woodinville. So I'm a non-executive director of Woodinville. But it's Orlin and Brett who run that show, the 2 guys who set up this distillery. But they basically spec'd and designed their own bourbon cask, their own American oak cask for making their bourbons. And it's heavily toasted, it's lightly charred, it's filled for an exact amount of time, 4 years with bourbon. So it's like a ready-made cask that's designed to take Glenmorangie. So one of my influences on Woodinville is they used to sell their casks here, there, and everywhere. I now buy every single cask that they sell. But I also get, outside of this year, I get head over there 4 times a year. And I just I help to distill. I get to be on the floor. I help to mash. I help to mill. I help to distill. And it's an amazing time. But also I get to leave with all their casks and maybe a suitcase full of bourbon as well and some rye.
Petehead makes an interesting point. It would take obviously a long time to get there, but Penderyn, theoretically, because they've got that vacuum still where they bring stuff off the still at 92%. I don't think they actually barrel it at 92%, but the Angels would kill that in the first couple of years. Yeah. But theoretically, because if most distilleries are going in at 62, 65, in that general range, between 60 and 65%, if you start off with a lot more, theoretically, it might last. You would have a little longer to go before you get down to the 50% or that 40%.
You need to be careful. So here's a random fact is a long time ago. So if you put boiling water into a freezer and you put cold water into a freezer without a lid on, the boiling water turns into ice quicker than the cold water. So it's all about, the speed of motion and stuff. So what you might find out is even though you have a higher strength, it's almost like a higher pressure behind the alcohol in the cask. So you just end up with the same amount pushing out. So I think even though it seems like something that gives you more chance, over the course of time, if you could fill an American oak barrel, an American oak ex-bourbon, Quercus Alba barrel with 100% alcohol, or you could get a very tight-grained American oak Oloroso sherry butt that's much bigger, my money would still be on the butt to hold the alcohol after. So I love the theory, but I just think that over the course of time, over the course of 100 years, even if you do somehow, by some miracle, keep the whiskey above 40%, I think by the time you've done it, you'd wonder, why have I done it? I think 12s, 18s, 25s are heaven. And then once you go above that, you still make heavenly whiskies from time to time, but it's more of you have to be very more selective, very more careful. And my gut is telling me once you get nearer 100, it's just going to be so much wood and nothing else.
Does that make sense to you, George?
No. So two different answers. I mean, it's yes, what Brendan's saying as well, but it can just be so hit and miss. When we first bought the family casks, we bought the 1968 casks. At the time, it was 36 years old, I think, and it came out at 65.1%. Because in 1968, we'd run out of space in the warehouse, and my grandfather filled at higher strength that year. But if you can imagine, we filled 100 casks at 75% or whatever. Out of the 50 that we still had left, only 2 of them were still at that strength. The rest of them had dropped down significantly as well.
Yeah.
And they were all pretty much filled into the same wood. You can't guarantee what it's going to be like as it ages. And a lot of the time with what we're doing in the industry, I mean, it's just chance. I mean, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work.
So this leads us to an interesting question. How do you define a good single malt whiskey? Because you two both are responsible for 3 very different whiskeys between the two of you. Mm-hmm. I mean, what Brendan's doing with Ardbeg and Glenmorangie and what you do at Glenfarclas, they're all 3 very different in character, but they're all 3 excellent. So what characteristics would define a good single malt whiskey?
So it's a very interesting question, and it's what makes it more interesting is the fact is 40 years ago, nobody drank single malt whiskey. We're still making the same whiskey as we're making 40 years ago. It's just at the moment that people like how it tastes. People like the style that's coming out of the distilleries. That was the whole reason why blended whiskey came about in the very beginning, because people didn't think that the individual flavors that were coming from distilleries were good enough. so they blend them all together. But it's now that people are enjoying the nuances and differences of them all. And I think that's what's great about Glenfarclas, Glenmorangie, Ardbeg, all the different distilleries. It's the fact that we have different styles, different flavors, and we all have something unique to enjoy from them.
Brendan?
So, unfortunately, George just went first and covered all the good answers because it's annoying, but you need to stop agreeing, as Nick Clegg said to David Cameron once. But I completely agree. I guess what makes great whiskey is, and these three whiskies I'm going to say are all what I would categorise as great whiskies. I suppose there's a couple of things. It depends who's drinking them, but for me, what makes a great whiskey is one that tastes incredible. So it has to taste incredible before anything else. I talk about, like, it sounds a wee bit posh or a wee bit over the top, but a whiskey that's balanced, a whiskey that has finesse or it has balance or it has a couple of things to find in it. It doesn't just taste of one thing. I think that's really important. And then as much as it pains you sometimes, what's great is to know a little bit of the story behind a whiskey. You know, so if you know some of the heritage, or you know something about the people who make it, or you know something about what was the quirk or the change if you're tasting a special or a one-off, I think that helps. But to be honest, like, if you boil it all the way down, well, if you distill it, I suppose that's exactly what I'm describing. If you distill it all the way down, does it taste great? If it tastes great, then it's a great whiskey. And if it tastes okay, it's an okay whiskey. And if it tastes terrible, it's not.
Greg Unrow says, I finally just saw Ardbeg Black show up at a local store in Calgary, Alberta for $170 Canadian. It showed up yesterday and they're already sold out. And I think 170 Canadian is about 135, 140 US dollars, something along those lines. But
Yep.
yeah, it's Ardbeg Black.
Yes.
That one, we talked about that in New Zealand. That was
We did.
one.
We did. It's very New Zealand led. I think the three of us drank it. I had a little sample bottle of it, and the black was based on Ardbeg being the black sheep of Islay. And what connections does Islay have with New Zealand? There's many, but one of them is sheep. We were going to go with rugby, but you know the Scottish are better than the New Zealanders at rugby, so we thought we better not cause a fight. But it's an amazing whiskey, and so first of all, I'm really proud of that whiskey, and we all are, and we think it's amazing. And I know it's tough that it sells out, but it's not a deliberate decision to restrict stock in. It's just we're trying to do stuff that's different, innovative. We're trying to push certain boundaries, and unfortunately, you can't do that if you buy off the shelf 2,000 casks of something. It just doesn't work that way. So we're not restricting it just to make it painful to try and get your hands on it. We are just trying to do bespoke little batches of something special, and that's why, unfortunately, everyone can't get their hands on one. But hopefully, you'll find it in a bar and you'll get to try it. You know, something beautiful.
Interesting question from Ben Marnik, and that's not the one. I'll bring that up later. From Grandfriend. I've often wondered if all distilleries that make blending whiskeys can make great single malts. And
No.
my take is no, not every whiskey is meant to be a single malt, right?
I would say no.
Correct.
We won't name any names here, but what?
But if you think about it, you know,
whiskey that
I always go back to food. So there's certain ingredients in food that are spectacular, but served on their own, you know, they don't make a great plate of food. So if I could use the example of, like, you know, Scotch bonnet chilies. It's got the word Scotch in it. It's very topical. But Scotch bonnet chilies are super hot chilies. So a little bit of that chili added to a mix of onions and ginger and garlic and a sauce for a curry, it makes it spectacular. It makes it pop. Or even salt. You know, put salt on anything. It's maybe not the best for you, but it kind of makes certain flavours pop. But you wouldn't serve a plate of salt. You know, it wouldn't work. And certain distilleries, they are doing an excellent job. And this is what sometimes will confuse people or blow people's minds or cause an argument. Their quality is absolutely on point. Their quality is 100% or 99%. But they're making a spirit that's designed for blending. And so they're doing the right thing, and blended whiskies are incredible. But it's not a whiskey that's designed to come out on its own as a single malt. It's just not. It's not what that distillery was designed to do. So I think these distilleries are essential and super important. And I love my blended whiskies. But it's just the same idea as, do you like salty food or do you like spicy food? Let's go for spicy food. Do you like spicy food? Yes. Here's a full plate of chilies. You're not going to thank anyone for that, and I think it's the same comparison.
George?
Yeah, no, exactly right. I mean, it's still today there's a lot of distilleries in Scotland that an awful lot of people, I'm sure, will never have heard of. There's still distilleries here that are just purely and simply making whiskey for blending purposes. Yes, you are seeing some of these distilleries that have been taken over and so on and been revamped as a single malt, but because they've changed their spirit, they've changed how they're aging it. But back in the day, these distilleries were, powerhouses of the industry.
Yeah.
When you look at, for instance, what Diageo and Pernod Ricard have done with Rose Isle and Dalmanock distilleries, they built those from the ground up specifically for blending with no real plans of ever bottling them as a single malt.
Yeah.
And to be able to tune it to whatever make different styles and tune each distillery to make multiple styles depending on what the blenders need.
Yeah.
Yep.
Now, let me bring up Ben Marnik's question. Where do you see your businesses in 20 years when you guys are in charge and George, your dad, is retired and Bill is retired at Glenmorangie? Where do you guys see the business 20 years from now when you're running the show for good?
Well, the way I see it is my father and Bill will never retire. I mean, I'm sure that's just a pipe dream. I think we can both say that the whiskey industry's changed so much in the last 20 years, and it's going to continue to change. How? I think we're going to continue to see new markets open up. We're going to see new demographics of people enjoying the whiskey. I think there's still so much more to grow. So,
Brendan?
I have, again, the same as George. I just can't envisage Bill ever retiring. Bill loves his job. He's aging like a fine wine, or he's aging like a really great whiskey, He's looking way better than me. Pretty soon, I'm going to look older than he does, if not already. So, I don't know. As long as I keep growing, as long as I keep getting given opportunities like Bill's given me, I'll be happy. But eventually, I do, I'm confident I'll be Bill's successor, and I'm confident that in 20 years' time, we will absolutely still have the original. So we'll still have Glenmorangie and ex-bourbon as the leading light. We'll still have our finishes to show off how you can kind of, nuance and flex this style. And I think we still will be really innovative. I think that's it's just something that Glenmorangie and Ardbeg stands for. And I know that Ardbeg will still be smoke first, smoke sweet, and something different. That'd definitely be, I would be looking to tweak and change and have my own ideas, which I think I already do have under Bill's guidance. But definitely it'd be respecting the core range and looking to make these amazing whiskies, just for a whole new generation of people to enjoy. But with George, I swear to God, honestly, in 100 years, I wouldn't be surprised if Bill's still here and going strong.
Unless the HR department gets to him first. I'm kidding. I am kidding.
Wow. You'll be fine.
I'm just curious, though. So that doesn't mean that you're going to maybe take a detour down to spend a few years in Ardbeg, maybe since Mickey's retiring in October. Have they decided who's going to replace him yet?
No, see, I've already been a distillery manager, So I was the distillery manager at Oban, and then don't forget when I lived on Islay, I was the distillery manager I was the group manager of Killila and Lagavulin and Port Ellen. So that's how I first got to know Mickey. So, in all honesty, if I could, I would move the entire operation to Islay because I lived there for 3 years, and it just has a very special place in my heart. But my wife would physically, not metaphorically, physically strangle me if I moved to Islay because she's from Stirling and she loves this town. So that would never be an option. Now, I did think about the idea of doing like a transition. You know, I'll go in there and I'll help make sure the transition, because Mickey leaving's a big thing. But I think everyone saw what I was trying. I was just trying to get, 3 months of a holiday on Islay. But no. I've been a distillery manager. I've helped make Islay malts. I've helped make Speyside malts, Highland malts. These days, my job is very much like a whiskey creator in Bill's team, and that's where I belong, I guess.
And Tracer Bullet is having a dram of the Anoa, but not from the bottle that you signed for him.
Well, I hope you're enjoying it. Don't worry, it's every bit as good as the one I signed, and it's probably worth more on the secondary market than the one I signed. So you're doing fine.
Does signing a bottle devalue it on the market, or does that depend on who signed it?
I was suggesting that me signing it takes the value down, but I'm just joking.
Matt Crumpler points out that he is amazed by Glenfarclas's ability to put out older whiskey at a consumer-friendly price, always equal or better than others that are charging twice the price. And cheers, Mr. Grant. How do you guys manage to do it? And what's the philosophy in terms of how you price your whiskeys, George?
I mean, it's very, very simple. I mean, if you look at all the other big companies that are around, they have been bought and sold. Glenmorangie, Ardbeg, the same. When these companies are bought, they have to reevaluate the cost of the whiskies in the warehouse. The difference is, this bottle of 40-year-old that I'm drinking, my family made this. We made the whiskey that's in there. We know exactly how much it costs. So we can then sell it at obviously, hopefully, a reasonable price. But it's another example is you look at people like Dalmore, which have changed hands 11 times in 50 years. Every time they have been bought and sold, they've had to reevaluate the cost of the stock that's in the warehouse. So at the end of the day, we want people to go buy a bottle of whiskey, be able to open it, drink it, then go buy another one. Sometimes you are looking at bottles of whiskey, obviously things like that. Perfect example. I mean, when are you ever going to have the right occasion to open something like that? I'd much rather people buy a bottle, open it, drink it, and of course, crack open another one.
Best investment you can make in whiskey is to make memories with good friends, I think.
Yeah.
Don't make or just sit there and collect dust. And Greg's Whiskey Guide agrees with that one. And as we pointed out on the graphics, Graham Fraser says even Jim McEwen retired. He retired. He's just consulting now. And Greg Unrau, who's in Calgary, agrees with Matt Crumpler on that. There's a huge differentiator for Glenfarclas. The core 21-year-old bottling is available locally in Calgary right now for $110 Canadian. That is about $80 US for a 21-year-old single malt Scotch. And
I'd buy it then. I think it's a mistake.
And our pal Monique Houston, that's why Glenfarclas was always my go-to. Great price, amazing value. First lesson the boys at the Dell taught me. And as we mentioned the other day on the webcast and on the show this weekend, the Dundee Dell in Omaha is closing after so many years. And
it's closing.
It's closing. Yeah, they're closing later this month. The ownership, the pandemic and the restrictions and the economy, they're looking for a buyer. They are looking for a buyer, but hopefully they can make it work. And my Glenfarclas story is a good one from a couple of years ago when I was in Taiwan. I found a bottle of the 105 at duty free at Taiwan's airport in Taipei. And I think the price I paid for it was about $35 US for a 1 liter bottle of the Glenfarclas 105. Needless to say, I jumped on that sucker. I thought it was a mistake too. And I still have some left, but and Luke Timmerman, hi Mark, long time ago. Greetings to George. Glenfarclas is still the best in his opinion. And Travis Adams, a good whiskey when you have to spend time with someone you don't like is just as valuable. Travis,
I like that. I think Travis Adams like a modern day Mark Twain or something. That's beautiful. Like an Oscar Wilde.
And Monique Houston says they're scrambling for an angel investor. Watch this space. If you have a couple $100,000 to invest in a restaurant in Omaha that has a hellacious whiskey collection, you guys know where to find Monique.
I have everything crossed, Monique. Everything crossed. So I hope it comes through.
Definitely.
Tabitha Adams, great comment. Whiskey makers don't retire, they regenerate, just like Doctor Who. And we should point out that Luke is one of the most famous Glenfarclas collectors in the world, according to Greg in Paris. Now,
He certainly is.
George stepped away for just a second here. So we saw what you did earlier this year with tell us about the new Cadball that the U.S. is getting, Brendan, from the Glenmorangie. Because we've talked a lot about Ardbeg. We haven't talked about much about Glenmorangie.
Yeah, so this is it here. So this is the limited release for America.
George is showing us a picture of Luke. Okay.
So this is go for it, George.
Luke is our biggest Glenfarclas collector. So we actually did a book to celebrate 175 years of Glenfarclas, and we did a whole chapter on Luke. So
nice.
There you go.
Okay.
Nice.
Please continue, Brendan. Okay, sorry about that.
Yeah. So the Catball Estates. So this whiskey right here it's a 15-year-old Glenmorangie from our local barley estate. So we own some barley fields right next to Glenmorangie House. So it's not Glenmorangie Distillery, Glenmorangie House, about 5 miles from our distillery. And the northeast corner of Scotland is possibly the best area in the world for growing distilling malted barley. So that's why we grow stuff there, and we buy as much barley from there as we can. But this barley tends to go into Glenmorangie Original, or it goes into Glenmorangie Signet. So a couple of very special drams. And this year, we just decided to do like a one-off release, a small batch. Talk about, 8,000-9,000 bottles in the world. But we just sort of took together some batches of 15-year-old single estate barley, and it's all in first fill ex-bourbon casks. It's a true vintage. It's all from 1994. And the reason I love it is it's my style of Glenmorangie. So I love the sherry finish, I love the port finish, I love the sauterne. But my absolute go-to, both for smoky and non-smoky, is kind of ex-bourbon barrel or pure sherry barrel. That's the kind of way I go. But ex-bourbon barrel tends to float my boat for Glenmorangie. And this really is. So if you like original, if you like Astar, if you like the 19-year-old, this is going to, float your boat. It's just a beautiful example of the ethereal, complex, fruity and floral Glenmorangie at its best. So all single estate, vintage, first fill Glenmorangie. What's not to love?
And it's different from the Cadball that's in travel retail. We need to explain that because it's going to confuse some people.
Yeah, that's true. So this is called the Catball Estate. So the Cadball that was in travel retail. So Cadball is an area close to Glenmorangie, and it means the hill where the cat lives. Because there used to be wild cats that wander about Scotland, lynxes and whatnot. So Cadball is the hill where the cat lives. And the Cadball Estate is where we grow our barley. So I think a slightly over-enthusiastic marketeer when I liked that name and named it after our sweet wine travel retail release, which is now out of circulation. So if you see that, grab it. But this one here, the 15-year-old age stated Cadball, is the Cadball Estate.
And let's also clarify that it's a little different from the Alta that was the final private edition release, which had yeast that you guys cultivated from the Cadball Estate.
That's it.
Barley did not come from the Cadball Estate.
No. The barley for Alta did come from the Cadball Estate. But what was different is we mashed the malted barley with yeast that was harvested from the corns of that Cadball Estate. This is basically our experimental little barley field that we have right next to our distillery.
Let's pose a question here that we asked on Twitter the other day after the Behind the Label segment on this week's podcast, where someone asked me to explain the story behind whiskey competitions. And let's be full disclosure, it was after you guys did very well in the international whiskey competition the last couple of years. They said, well, does LVMH sponsor it? And I said, no, they're not a sponsor.
Nope.
But what I do have a question about, though, is how much attention do you guys as whiskey makers pay to whiskey competitions and the results of competitions? How much How much effort do you actually put into it, and do you really care? And does it matter?
So it feels wonderful when you win an award. It really does. But as a whiskey maker, we're already working on next year's whiskey. So there's whiskies that have landed this year. There's the whiskies that are going to land next year. And there's whiskies that landed last year. And it tends to be whiskies last year that win the awards, because they go out into the marketplace. People start to taste them. They try them and they give them an award. But we're already working on next year's whiskey when the awards for last year's whiskey come in. So it's great, and it's an honour, and it feels brilliant to win awards, and it feels great to get some recognition. But as an actual physical thing of how do we make our whiskies, it doesn't change what we're doing. We're setting out to make innovative whiskies. We're setting out to make different whiskies. We're setting out to make sure our core whiskies are as consistent as you would want them to be, because you don't want really be super consistent. So we're not influenced by awards, but when you get awards, it feels great. It does feel great, but it doesn't change your raison d'etre, if you like. It doesn't change what you set out to do. You know your house style. You know what you're trying to achieve. I'm more likely to be... So let me give a theoretical example. I've just seen Bacalta pop up there, which I love. So Bacalta was our Madeira finish. So let's say that the Bacalta won World Whisky of the Year, best single release of a year. That'd be great. But would that then make us stop buying all our sherry casks and switch to only buying Madeira casks? No, it just wouldn't. It just wouldn't. But we would feel like, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. We nailed that Bacalta. What could we learn from that? But it won't change our whole stock profile, So it's great to win awards, but it doesn't necessarily change how you approach your whiskey making process.
George, with 175 years of your family owning the distillery, does it matter whether you guys win awards or not?
I mean, as Brendan said, yes, it's nice to win awards, and there's certain awards out there that are nice to win. Ones that you feel that have been sort of been voted for by your peers, or you've been put forward by. The problem today, not just within the whiskey industry, with any awards, I think, is there's so many different award categories or awards out there, and with a lot of these people, for each entry it'll be £1,000. You've got to supply 6 bottles of whiskey, or it's X amount of money for this, X amount of money for that. So obviously, yes, the more awards you're going to enter in for, the more chance you've got to win. And like you were saying, it's not that your LVMH are sponsoring the award per se, but let's say that they even put in 20 different expressions that then obviously you've got a bigger chance to win an award for, not just LVMH, but Diageo, Chivas, etc. So a lot of the times we will look at them and go, well, okay, this year we will enter this awards or we'll enter that awards. We don't enter all of them every single time, because as Brendan said as well, yes, it's nice to win something every now and again, because it also gives you a little bit of press, something to talk about. But at the end of the day, is it going to change the whiskey we're making? No.
And Tabitha Adams just pointed, sometimes it feels that every whiskey has won one award or another, to the point that I feel they're meaningless to a consumer.
Right.
We have too many.
But
I think that's fair.
But what's unfortunate behind it as well is when you do go to certain markets, some more than others, unless you have had an award or had a high score from something, they won't even entertain you. They won't even look at your product for their country, which is just stupid.
Yeah, I'd agree. I agree with, I can't remember who made that comment, but I agree for some people, because you're really into whiskey and you've been into it for a long time and you see these awards, so it's become pointless to you, and that's fair. But I think you need to remember there's lots of different consumers, and for some people they're just looking for something, and if you just see like that has won an award, that helps. It depends who you are, but the more educated you become in whiskey, you realise that to win awards is great, but it's not the only thing. It's just like regions are not the only thing. It's just like name is not the only thing. It's not packaging's the only thing. It just helps to build together a story for whatever whiskey you're into.
And I love this comment from Greg. The best award, in my opinion, is word of mouth praise. And Chris Ratcliffe points out for some whiskeys, an award of some sort means it's suddenly unavailable for drinkers as it gets snapped up by collectors and flippers. Personally, I'm waiting for somebody to issue a whiskey award for, say, the best 14-year-old Speyside single cask bottling distilled by a left-handed distiller on leap year day, because I think that would be about maybe one person could win that award possibly. And Tom Smith asked this question. My question for George: how many members of your family work full-time at the distillery? I know you have a young daughter. She's not working there yet. She got her rolling casks yet, right?
Definitely not. No, it's $2. No, myself and my father are still here.
So only two. But do you think your daughters will eventually take over the place?
No idea. I mean, my oldest daughter is 13. My youngest one is 8. So.
Yeah, they've got a lot of growing up to do before they decide what they want to do. Eh?
Just like us, Brendan.
Yeah.
So how do you decide what happens? Because what happens to the distillery? Because after 175 or plus years, you've got to have. Obviously, you know that eventually you're going to be running the place at some point. But what happens when you're ready to step aside? If your daughters don't want to.
No, you can never say that. Anything for 100% sure. It's at the end of the day, you don't want to force them into doing anything. And if it is something that they're interested in, then great, they're interested in it. But as we were saying before as well, it's an ever-changing world in the whiskey industry. And thankfully, you are, at least today, seeing an awful lot of sort of more women involved in the industry as well. But let's see. Hopefully, there's plenty of time for them to make their minds up.
Question for Brendan now. How will the new still houses at Glenmorangie and Ardbeg affect those distilleries? I know the one on Glenmorangie is pretty much an experimental distillery, right?
Yep. Yes. So, yeah. So the question's split down the middle. So at Glenmorangie, the new still house will absolutely change the flavour on purpose. So it's 2 sets of stills that are completely separate from the main still house, and it's there to sort of drive our innovation and research and development agenda. Now, it can also make our traditional spirit if we choose to, but I know that Bill will sort of hit me with a rubber hose if I choose to make normal stuff with it. He wants me to make crazy and different. Ardbeg, completely different story. Ardbeg Distillery's new still house is an expansion. And if anyone goes, oh, for God's sake, here we go, there's another whiskey distillery expanding. It's been 205 years since we expanded. So it kind of feels like time. It's been 205 years. So we're adding, we used to have 2 sets of still, a wash still and a spirit still. We're now going to have 2 wash stills and 2 spirit stills. And they will make the exact same spirit character as we always have.
And considering that people have been complaining about the lack of Ardbeg stocks for years now, it's probably
here comes the catch-22, Mark. And believe me, I love it. I love the complaint. I do love the complaint, but here comes the catch-22. I can't get my Ardbeg, which is great. But then when you make more, you're going to ruin Ardbeg by making more. And you're like, come on. But believe me, we're spending so much time on it. It's a batch process. We're just putting in 2 new sets of stills, and we will make sure it's exactly the same. But at Glenmorangie, definitely going for weird and wonderful.
And Ben Marnik asks, well, should you really even call the whiskey from there Glenmorangie at that point? I'm saying, yeah, why not?
Of course you should. Of course you should. Think about it. Why is it called Glenmorangie? It's mashed, fermented, and distilled at Glenmorangie. Now, if it's a different spirit character, I'd point to Signet, or I would point to certain distilleries in Speyside that when it's hot will make a grassy character in the winter, and in the summer they'll make a more sulphury character. What makes it Glenmorangie is not how it tastes, it's the location that it's distilled at, but we make it consistent. But when we make something different, it's just a different expression. And don't worry, we will mark that clearly on the label. We'll tell the story of why it's different. We won't make Glenmorangie original in this new still house. It's just 2 stills that are separate from the other still house, but they're connected.
In a lot of ways, it's like what Lagavulin had with Malt Mill so many years ago.
No,
Okay,
no, because that's really different. Because Malt Mill was a different distillery supplied from the same area, but they tried to market it as something completely different.
Okay.
This will be Glenmorangie, and the new stills will make innovative Glenmorangie. Think like Signet or something like that. But no, Malt Mill was very much an attempt by a fella who used to own Lafroig to make a version of Lafroig using Lagavulin production processing equipment. And he was quite rightly stopped by the Scotch Whisky Act. So yeah, definitely, Mark. I appreciate the logic, but no. Completely different.
I stand corrected. So, one final question before we wrap this up. Do each of you have a go-to whiskey or a whiskey that you enjoy that isn't one that you make? George, do you have a non-Glenfarclas whiskey that you have as a go-to when you're drinking something other than your stuff?
Yeah, I've got a couple of them. I do enjoy a lot of bourbon. Obviously, I work with Sazerac in the States, so I'm very lucky to drink a lot of their things. But honestly, so the question people ask me is which whiskey you drink the most of after Glenfarclas. And my honest answer is Johnny Walker Black Label. I end up in some amazingly weird places in America, in China, in India, all over the world. And to be honest, you walk into the bar or open the minibar and Johnny Walker Black Label staring at you. And it's like McDonald's, it is absolutely everywhere. So at least you know what you're going to get. And especially in some of these places, it's got the guava cap on the top of it. So that would be my answer. As far as the single malt, my go-to one would be Anok. Anok, 21-year-old from Knockdhu Distillery, just because that was the first distillery I ever worked in. And that's why. There you go.
Nice.
I didn't know that you worked at Anok.
Neither did I.
I worked at Anok, you'll love this one then. So I worked at Bal Blair as well. And I lost an entire day when I was working at Bal Blair because, this was 1998, 1999. I was invited down to Glenmorangie, which was also just down the road from Bal Blair. And this was about 6 months before they were launching all their finishes that they came out with. So if you remember when they first came out, you did the port finish, the sherry finish. But when we went into the warehouse, they had Calvados, they had a different brandy one. There was lots of different other casks that actually they'd experimented with that never made it to actually be bottled up. So we spent the day in the warehouse tasting all these experimental ones. And I remember them opening the doors, and there was a busload of Japanese tourists as the doors opened and the sunlight hit us. And it wasn't a pretty sight, to be honest.
Why did you go to Anok and Bal Blair to start out with? Did your dad want you to get some experience someplace else first, or what?
Yeah, there was that, but it was also a rule that was given out by my grandfather, that if you were going to come and work at Glenfarclas and be a member of the family, you had to go work at another distillery first. Because obviously, if you're going to make a mistake, it's better you go make it in somebody else's distillery and not your own one. I was obviously a very slow learner because I worked at 4 distilleries before I came here.
Brendan?
So it's very centered, but I lived on Islay. I lived on Islay for 3 years, 3 of the best years of my life. I now work with Ardbeg, so obviously Ardbeg's there. I used to work at Lagavulin, and I'm really good friends with. I played for Port Ellen Football Club, which was the football team, and most of the team worked at Ardbeg or Lafroig. So it's a Lafroig 10, or it's a Lagavulin 16. If you come to my house, we have lots of peated, we have lots of sherried, we have lots of everything, but the smoky region is well represented because of that. So Lagavulin 16, I struggle to see past. Lafroig 10, I think is incredible. But I'm also with George, Johnny Walker 12 is just an exceptional dram as well.
Well, guys, I think that pretty much we've gone more than an hour and 10 minutes or so. And I want to thank both of you for giving us your time tonight. And I know it's late over there, but thank you both to George Grant from Glenfarclas and Brendan McCarron from Ardbeg and Glenmorangie. Stay safe, guys. And I really appreciate your time on behalf of all of our audience. Thank you for joining us right now. Let me say a few closing words here because We have a fun show coming up on the Happy Hour webcast on Friday when we do our usual panel of writers. We have the one and only Charlie McLean joining us. And Charlie's written more books about whiskey than most people have read by other authors, and a lot of whiskey authors combined for that matter. And a master of the Quake and also a whiskey consultant. He ran the Scotch Malt Whiskey Society tasting panel for many, many years and still does to this day. And we'll also be joined by Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Fame historian Michael Veach, who has written some of the most extensive and well-researched history of bourbon and American whiskeys that you'll find out there. So if you've got questions about the history of either Scotch whiskey or bourbon, you are going to want to watch the Friday webcast and join us. Bring your questions. We'll pose them to the guys and see what they can handle, see what they're able to answer, and we'll try to answer some of your questions and have fun. That's coming up on Friday afternoon, 5 p.m. New York time, 10 p.m. UK time, 2100 GMT. And until we meet again, I'm Mark Gillespie. Thanks for joining us and have a great week. Take care of yourselves, and please, when you go out in public, wear the damn mask, okay? We need everybody to stay safe. Good night, all.